In this tutorial, you will learn about CSS units and sizing in more detail. We will explore how different CSS units work, when to use each one, and how they affect the size and layout of elements on a web page. Rem is a CSS unit that is relative to the font size of the root element, usually the HTML element. The name rem stands for root M. Unlike M, which depends on the font size of its parent element, rem always uses the root font size as its reference. By default, most browsers set the root font size to 16px, so 1 rem is usually equal to 16px, 2 rem is 32px, 3 rem is 48px, and 4 rem is 64px. Rem is commonly used for font sizes, margins, padding, and other spacing because it makes it easier to create consistent and scalable designs. px is a CSS unit that stands for pixels. It is one of the most commonly used units in CSS and is useful when you want to set a specific and predictable size for an element. For example, 12px can be used for small text or spacing. 16px is a common size for normal text. 24px can be used for larger text or headings. And 36px can be used for large headings. You can use pixels to control many different properties, including font size, width, height, padding, margin, borders, and gaps. For example, font size. 16px makes the text 16 pixels in size. Unlike rem, which changes based on the root element's font size, px gives you a fixed value, making it useful when you need precise control over the size and spacing of elements in your web page. Percentage % is a CSS unit that is relative to another value, usually the size of a parent element or the inherited font size. Percentages are useful for creating flexible and responsive designs because the size can change depending on the screen or parent element. For example, when the base font size is 16px, 75% is about 12px, 100% is 16px, 140% is about 22.4px, often rounded or displayed differently depending on the browser, and 200% is 32px. You can use percentages for font sizes, widths, heights, margins, padding, and other CSS properties. For example, width, 75% makes an element 75% as wide as its parent, while font size, 100% uses the inherited font size. Percentages are especially helpful when you want your website to adjust smoothly to different screen sizes. VW stands for viewport width and is a CSS unit that is relative to the width of the browser window or screen. 1 VW is equal to 1% of the viewport's width, so the size changes as the screen becomes wider or narrower. For example, 2 VW is 2% of the viewport width, 4 VW is 4%, 6 VW is 6%, and 8 VW is 8%. VW can be useful for creating responsive font sizes, widths, spacing, and layouts that adjust automatically to different screen sizes. For example, font size. 4 VW makes the font size responsive because it grows on larger screens and becomes smaller on smaller screens. Clamp is a CSS function that allows you to set a value that can grow or shrink while staying within a minimum and maximum limit. The basic format is clamp, minimum, preferred, maximum. For example, clamp 1 rem, 3 VW, 3 rem means the value will never be smaller than 1 rem. We'll try to use 3 VW as the preferred size and will never become larger than 3 rem. This is especially useful for responsive designs because the size can automatically adjust based on the screen width. For example, you can use font size. Clamp 1 rem, 3 VW, 3 rem to create text that gets larger on bigger screens while still keeping the text readable on smaller screens. CH is a CSS unit that is based on the width of the 0 character in the current font. It is especially useful for controlling the width of text and keeping paragraphs at a comfortable reading length. For example, using max width. 60 ch limits a paragraph to approximately 60 characters per line, depending on the font. This prevents lines from becoming too long on large screens and makes the text easier to read. The CH unit is commonly used with paragraphs, articles, and other text content where readability is important. In this example, we will build a simple web page about building meaningful friendships to demonstrate how different CSS units and sizing techniques work together. We will use px, %, rem, vw, and clamp to control the size of the text, spacing, and layout. We will also use the universal selector with box sizing, border box, margin, 0, and padding, 0 to reset the default spacing and make sizing more predictable. First, we will style the body of the web page to create a clean and readable foundation for our building meaningful friendships example. We will use font family, Arial, sans serif, so the text is simple and easy to read. The padding, 2 rem adds space around the content, while background gives the page a soft, light background. We will use color for the main text so it has strong contrast against the background. Finally, line height. 1.6 adds comfortable spacing between lines of text, making the paragraphs easier to read. The next step is to test different font size values, so we can clearly see how CSS units and sizes affect the text. First, set the heading to font size. To rem and observe how it looks. Next, change the font size to 50px and compare the difference. Finally, change it to 32px and see how the text becomes smaller again. By changing the value from 2 rem to 50px and then to 32px, you can visually compare relative sizing with a fixed pixel size and understand how different CSS units affect the appearance of text. Next, try changing the text size using percentage values and observe how the text changes on the page. Start with a smaller value, then increase it gradually and compare the results. Continue increasing the value until the text becomes significantly larger. This will help you understand how percentage-based sizing works in CSS and how the text can scale relative to its inherited size. Experimenting with these values makes it easier to see the difference between smaller, normal, and larger text sizes. Next, try changing the text size using the VW unit N. Observe how the text responds to the width of the browser window. As you resize the browser, you will notice that the text grows when the viewport becomes wider and becomes smaller when the viewport becomes narrower. This is a useful way to demonstrate responsive sizing because the font size automatically adjusts based on the screen width. Experiment with different VW values and watch how the heading changes as you resize the window. Now try using the clamp function for the text size. This allows the font to resize smoothly based on the screen size while keeping it within a minimum and maximum limit. As you resize the browser window, you will see the text grow or shrink instead of staying at one fixed size. This is a great way to create responsive typography because clamp gives you more control over how large or small the text can become. Next, create a paragraph and set its max width using the CH unit. The CH unit is based on the width of the 0 character in the current font, making it useful for controlling the length of lines of text. By using a value such as max width, 60 ch, the paragraph will not become too wide, even on larger screens. This keeps the lines at a comfortable reading length and makes the content easier to read. As the screen gets smaller, the paragraph can still shrink naturally to fit the available space. Next, add a font size to the paragraph using the rem unit. This gives the paragraph a consistent and scalable text size while keeping it easy to read. Using rem also allows the text size to respond to changes in the root font size, making it a useful unit for creating accessible and flexible typography. Together with the max width set in C8, the paragraph will have a comfortable line length and a readable text size. You have now completed the tutorial on CSS units and sizes. In this tutorial, you learned how to use different CSS units to control the size, spacing, and layout of elements on a web page. You explored pixels, rem, percentages, VW, clamp, and CX, and saw how each unit can be useful in different situations. You also learned how responsive sizing can help your text and layout adapt to different screen sizes. With these concepts, you now have a strong foundation for creating more flexible, readable, and responsive websites using CSS.